What if Kratos entered the Halo universe and meets the Spartans of the UNSC? The world had already died. Reach had been a fortress. Humanity's sword arm, its shield wall, the planet behind which 700 million people had slept, believing themselves safe. The Covenant had taken 11 days to turn it into a graveyard. What remained was glass. Kilometers of fused silica desert stretching in every direction. The molten legacy of plasma bombardment so thorough and so complete that the land itself had been remade into something unrecognizable. Twisted superstructures jutted from the hardened surface like broken bones. The atmosphere still carried the faint chemical signature of incinerated cities. The ash drifted through air that smelled of ionized metal and something older. Something that had no business existing on a world so thoroughly scoured of life. And then the sky broke open. It was not a slip-space rupture. UNSC sensors knew those. The Cherenkov flash, the gravitational distortion, the telltale electromagnetic signature of a Shaw Fujikawa drive punching through the fabric of space. This was something else entirely. A tear, a wound in the geometry of reality itself, ragged at the edges, pulsing with a light that was simultaneously green and gold, and the deep arterial red of something ancient bleeding out. It lasted 4 seconds. Long enough for the surviving UNSC emergency relay station, buried 3 kilometers beneath the glass, to register the anomaly, flag it, and begin transmitting a priority burst to the nearest patrol frigate. Long enough for what came through to hit the ground. He did not fall. That was the first thing the relay station's exterior sensor array recorded. A figure approximately 2 meters tall, ash-gray skin, a crimson tattoo climbing the left side of his face like a scar given color. Landing in the glass desert not with the uncontrolled tumble of a man thrown through dimensions, but with the deliberate, planted certainty of a warrior who had fallen from greater heights and chosen where his feet would meet the earth. The impact cracked the glass beneath him in a starburst pattern 6 meters across. He absorbed it through his knees, one massive hand pressed to the surface, and stayed still for exactly 3 seconds. And then the god of war stood up and looked at what humanity had left behind. His name was Kratos. He had been a general of Sparta, a servant of Olympus, a murderer of gods, and finally, reluctantly, imperfectly, something approaching a father and a man. He had walked through the realm of the Norse dead. He had held Mjolnir. He had looked into the eyes of the All-Father and refused to blink. He had seen worlds end before, had in fact been responsible for ending more than one, and the particular quality of catastrophic destruction spread before him now was not unfamiliar. But the scale was different. Greek Olympus had burned building by building, god by god. Whatever had happened here had burned everything at once from above, with a patience and a thoroughness that spoke not of rage but of doctrine. Someone had decided this world needed to cease to exist, and they had been very, very good at it. The blades of chaos hung at his back, their chains cold against his skin, the forerunner interference that had crackled through them during transit already fading. The Leviathan axe sat at his hip, its dwarven runes dim in this alien atmosphere but present, responsive, alive in the way only things forged by true craftsmen ever were. His gear was intact. His body was intact. The rift had deposited him here whole, which was more than could be said for the world around him. He began to walk. There was no destination yet. There was only information to gather. The discipline Atreus had, in a painful reversal of expectation, slowly taught him. Do not react, observe. The land told him things. If the glass was old enough to have cooled but recent enough that the underlying strata hadn't fully settled. Weeks, perhaps. The atmosphere was breathable, thin but functional, carrying oxygen at ratios not unlike Midgard. The sky was wrong. 2 moons where he expected one. A star slightly too blue at the horizon. The gravity was familiar enough that his stride required no adjustment. He found the first body 20 minutes into his walk. Human, military, based on the partial armor, a design he had never seen, ceramic composite plates in olive drab, a helmet with a shattered visor. The weapon beside it was a firearm of some sophistication, mechanism fused by heat, magazine still loaded with rounds that had never been fired. The soldier had died running. Whatever had caught them had done so from above. Kratos crouched beside the body for a moment. A warrior, young, based on the frame, dead in someone else's war. He straightened, turned his face toward the distant sound that had registered at the edge of his divine senses 30 seconds ago, and narrowed his eyes. Engines, aircraft, getting closer. They had seen him land. Of course they had. He did not reach for his weapons. He stood in the open, on the glassed plain of a dead world, arms at his sides, and waited for whoever was coming to come. In his experience, how an encounter began mattered less than most warriors believed. What mattered was reading the intent behind the first move. Aggression, fear, calculation, desperation. Each required a different answer. The dropship that crested the ruined ridgeline was angular and utilitarian, military in every line, air descending on thruster columns with the practiced efficiency of a crew that had done this 10,000 times in conditions far worse than this. It touched down 40 meters away. The bay door dropped. 5 figures stepped out, and Kratos felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not fear, something adjacent to it. The instinctive recalibration of a warrior's mind encountering something that did not fit expected parameters. The figures were human in shape, but wrong in proportion. Each stood above 2 meters. Each moved with a fluid, mechanical precision that spoke of physical enhancement so thorough it had fundamentally renegotiated what a human body could be. Their armor was green and gray. Plates of ceramic and titanium alloy formed around frames that were simply too large, too coordinated, and too deliberate to be unaugmented soldiers. The one at the front raised a weapon, a rifle of elegant, brutal design, and pointed it directly at him. The voice that came through the helmet was female, flat and absolutely certain of itself. Unknown combatant, you have 10 seconds to identify yourself and explain how you arrived on Reach. Kratos looked at the rifle. He looked at the soldier holding it. He looked at the 4 behind her, all in identical postures, all carrying identical certainty. He had been a Spartan once too, a different kind, a worse kind perhaps, or simply an older one. Born from a civilization that had decided the best way to forge warriors was to take children and break them into something the battlefield could use. Looking at these 5, he saw the same philosophy executed with considerably more technology and considerably less mythology. He respected it immediately. He did not say so. "I am Kratos," he said. "I arrived through a portal that no longer exists. I do not know where I am. I do not intend violence unless violence is chosen for me." A pause. The rifle did not lower. "That's not an answer to either question. It is the only answer I have." Another pause, longer this time. The soldier at the front was reading him. He could see it in the slight adjustment of her helmet's orientation, the way her trigger finger remained indexed rather than curled. Professional, disciplined, genuinely uncertain, which was the most dangerous state for a trained warrior to occupy. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Hope shines brightest in the darkest night. Then she said, "Sierra 104, we're taking him in." They did not restrain him. That decision said more about the Spartans than any briefing document could have. A lesser unit, standard UNSC Marines, ONI field operatives, even most special forces, would have attempted it, would have produced zip ties or mag cuffs or whatever restraint technology this civilization had developed, and would have learned something very painful very quickly about the difference between a man and a god. But Sierra 104 had watched him land, had seen the crater, and had run the numbers on the impact velocity and the mass displacement, and arrived at a conclusion that most warriors in most universes took considerably longer to reach, that some things could not be caged by hardware alone, and that attempting it without certainty of success was simply a way of starting a fight you had not yet decided to start. So instead, she put him in the troop bay of the Pelican, sat across from him with her rifle resting across her knees, not aimed, not holstered, and said nothing for the first 40 seconds of flight. Kratos sat with his back against the hull and studied the Spartans the way he had once studied enemy formations from Spartan hilltops. Systematically, without the pretense of casualness, 4 of them plus the pilot, Sierra 104 in the center, 2 on his left, 1 on his right, on all maintaining the same studied stillness that spoke of people trained to treat waiting as a tactical state rather than dead time. Their armor was impressive, not godly. He had worn the armor of Ares himself, had carried weapons that rewrote the laws of physics, but impressive in the specifically human way of things built by people who could not rely on divine intervention and had compensated through engineering. The one on his right was watching him with an intensity that even the visor could not fully conceal. "Your weapons?" Sierra 104 said finally. "The ones on your back, what are they made of?" Kratos glanced at her. "Why does that matter?" "Because our sensors can't identify the alloy, or the energy signature from the chains, or..." She stopped, recalibrated. "Because I like to understand what's in the room with me." A reasonable answer. He gave her a reasonable one in return. They were forged by gods, the blades by the god of fire, the axe by 2 dwarves who understood metal better than anyone I have ever known. He paused. "They are not for your scientists. I haven't asked for them. You were considering it." The visor turned toward him. A long moment, then with something that might have been the ghost of amusement underneath the professional flatness. "Fair." The Pelican broke atmosphere 40 minutes later and docked with something vast. A UNSC vessel, cruiser class based on the duration of transit through its landing bay. The sound of its drives a constant low resonance through the hull. They walked him through corridors of gunmetal gray and fluorescent light. Surrey past sailors who stopped what they were doing and stared. Past blast doors and checkpoints where Sierra 104's biometric cleared the path without conversation. The ship smelled of recycled air and machine oil, and the specific tension of people who had survived something catastrophic and had not yet decided how they felt about still being alive. He recognized that smell. He had lived inside it for years. They put him in a room that was not a cell, but had been designed to function as one. Reinforced walls, a single table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, a mirror that was obviously a window, lights recessed behind shatterproof panels. Sierra 104 stood by the door. The others positioned themselves in the corridor outside. No restraints, no threats. Just the architecture of containment arranged around a subject they were not certain they could contain. A different person entered 3 minutes later. She was human, unaugmented, in her early 50s, wearing the gray uniform of a naval officer, with the kind of insignia that meant she answered to people who did not officially exist. Her eyes were the color of shallow water over stone, pale, clear, and completely without warmth. She sat down across from him, placed a data pad on the table without looking at it, and regarded him with the expression of someone who had interviewed things that defied categorization before and had developed a methodology for it. "My name is Commander Ewan," she said. "Office of Naval Intelligence. You're going to tell me everything. I have already told your soldier everything I know. You told her your name and that you came through a portal." Ewan's tone was the careful flatness of someone managing a very specific kind of patience. "That is not everything. It is everything relevant. I'll determine what's relevant." She folded her hands on the table. "The energy signature from your arrival matches no known slipspace technology, no Covenant drive system, no Forerunner construct in our database. The weapons you're carrying are reading as partially organic, partially metallurgical, and partially something our instruments don't have a category for. Your physiology..." She glanced at the data pad for the first time. "Irma, your physiology is human in baseline architecture and utterly inexplicable in every measurable deviation from that baseline. Bone density off our charts, musculature beyond any augmentation program we've ever run. Cellular regeneration that our medical officer describes as, and I'm quoting directly, aggressively implausible." Kratos said nothing. "So?" Ewan set the data pad down. "You can see why I have questions. I can see why you are afraid." The temperature in the room dropped slightly. Ewan's expression did not change, which told him more about her than any expression would have. "I'm not afraid," she said. "You are sitting across a table from something your instruments cannot explain, in a room your walls cannot hold, and you are trying to establish control through information because you have no other lever." He leaned forward slightly, not threateningly, simply reducing the distance between his words and her ears. I do not blame you for it. It is intelligent, but call it what it is. A long silence. Outside, through the false mirror, he could feel the attention of whoever was watching. More analysts, more soldiers, more people with data pads and insufficient categories. Then Ewan said, "Where did you come from?" Another world. Another reality. Through a portal opened by technology older than your civilization's calendar. Forerunner? The word meant nothing to him, but her certainty when she said it was interesting. Possibly, I do not know that name. The beings who built the structures on Reach, on other worlds, ancient, gone, nar or nearly gone. She leaned forward now, matching his posture without seeming to realize it. There was a Forerunner signal active on Reach for approximately 6 hours before your arrival. Our monitoring station flagged it as anomalous. It didn't match any known Forerunner transmission protocol. And then you fell out of the sky directly above it. Kratos considered this. Then your ancient builders may be responsible for my presence here. Which raises the question of why. Yes, he agreed. It does. The door opened before Ewan could continue. Sierra 104 stepped inside, and something in the set of her shoulders, even through the armor, even through the deliberate stillness, carried the specific quality of information that had just changed the shape of the situation. "Commander," she said, "the Pillar of Autumn just made contact. Master Chief is being diverted here before the Halo mission. Captain Keyes wants a full briefing." A pause. He's seen the sensor footage from Reach. Ewan stood, straightening her uniform with the habitual precision of someone who expressed control through small gestures when large ones were unavailable. She looked at Kratos one final time. "It seems," she said, "you're about to have a more interesting conversation." Section 3. The Pillar of Autumn docked 3 hours later. Kratos heard it before anyone told him. The deep structural groan of a vessel of considerable mass making hard contact with the cruiser's docking collar, the pressurization sequence cycling through the walls, the subtle shift in the ship's gravity signature that came from adding that much tonnage to one side of the hull. And he had been sitting in the same chair for 3 hours, which was not imprisonment so much as mutual agreement. He had not been given food. He had not asked for it. He had spent the time doing what he had learned, slowly and at great cost, to do in stillness, thinking rather than planning, observing the quality of the silence around him rather than filling it with noise. What he had concluded was this: these people were losing. It was in the architecture of the ship. Efficient, yes, but efficient in the way of things designed to compensate for resource scarcity. The corridors he had walked were maintained, but not maintained well. The kind of upkeep that spoke of crews stretched thin across too many demands. The sailors who had stared at him in the hallways had the eyes of people running on inadequate sleep, inadequate stimulants. The commander's patience had the particular texture of someone accustomed to problems without good solutions. Even the Spartans, extraordinary as they were, carried themselves with the controlled urgency of warriors who understood that being extraordinary had not been enough. A civilization at war with something it could not defeat. Fighting anyway. He understood that state of existence intimately. The door opened and Sierra 104 stepped inside, alone this time, and removed her helmet. He had expected youth. He had not expected what youth looked like when it had been processed through whatever program had made her. A face that was perhaps 25 years old in raw chronology and considerably older in every other measurable dimension. Sharp features, brown eyes with the specific flatness of someone who had learned to keep their reactions behind glass, a jaw set with the permanent tension of a person whose body existed in a state of perpetual readiness. She set the helmet on the table and sat across from him in the chair Ewan had occupied, which told him this was her choice rather than an instruction. "I'm Linda," she said. "Sierra 104, since we're apparently past the formal phase." "Kratos." "I know." She studied him with the directness of someone who had decided that pretending not to stare was a waste of both their time. "I've been a Spartan for 19 years. I've fought Covenant, insurrectionists, things that don't have names in our military database. I've seen augmented soldiers, alien warriors, flood combat forms." A pause. So I've never seen anything land the way you landed. Does that concern you? Everything concerns me. That's what 19 years of this does. She leaned back slightly. What concerns me right now specifically is that you've been cooperative, which is either because you're genuinely not a threat or because you've decided cooperation is currently your most efficient option. I can't tell which. Both, Kratos said. They are not mutually exclusive. Something shifted fractionally in her expression, not quite amusement, but the acknowledgement of a point. Master Chief arrives in 40 minutes, she said. Before he gets here, I want to understand something. The signal on Reach, the Forerunner signal that apparently opened your portal. Did you follow it? Were you drawn to it? Did you activate it? I activated nothing. I was pulled through against my choice. Ragnarok, she said, testing the word like a soldier testing ice over water. You said that word during the sensor intake review. What is it? He looked at her steadily. The end of a world, a cycle of destruction my people believed inevitable. We stopped it. A pause. The stopping of it created consequences, rifts, instabilities in the boundaries between realms. Apparently one of those instabilities found resonance with your Forerunner signal. Realms, Linda repeated. Not planets, not star systems. Dimensions, layers of reality separated by boundaries that are not physical in the way your slip space is physical. He considered how to frame it for someone whose cosmology had been built on physics rather than mythology. Your species travels between stars by punching through a layer of reality adjacent to your own. My world contained many such layers, each one a different reality, a different domain, accessible through knowledge and power rather than technology. Linda was quiet for a moment, processing this with the systematic patience of someone whose mind had been trained to intake and categorize. And the weapons, the axe and the blades, they work here. Yes. How? They are not technological. They do not require compatible infrastructure. They are extensions of divine power forged into physical form. He glanced at the Leviathan axe at his hip. The Forerunner interference disrupted the blades briefly during transit. It has since resolved. They function as they always have. Define divine power. Power derived from godhood. From the fundamental forces that govern a reality's existence. War, death, fire, frost. The deeper mechanisms beneath what your science would call physics. He met her eyes. I have killed gods, Commander. Multiple pantheons. What I carry is what remains of their power, claimed through combat and inheritance. Linda looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, with the careful precision of someone choosing words like a soldier choosing ground, in this universe, the closest thing we have to gods are the Forerunners. And they're gone. What replaced them is trying to kill us. The Covenant. And something worse, potentially. Something we haven't fully encountered yet. She paused. The Forerunner signal on Reach wasn't broadcasting randomly. Our analysts think it was responding to something, reaching out to something compatible. Something that shared a frequency with Forerunner divine tier energy signatures. The implication landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. You believe the signal reached into my reality deliberately, Kratos said. I believe it's possible. She held his gaze. Which means your arrival here might not be an accident. Which means whoever or whatever is still operating that Forerunner system may have wanted you here specifically. Before Kratos could respond, the ship's internal comm system crackled. Spartan 104, report to Docking Bay 7. Master Chief has arrived. Linda stood, picked up her helmet, and held it under her arm. She looked at Kratos with that same glass-flat expression that nevertheless managed to carry something underneath it. Not warmth exactly, but the specific regard of one warrior taking the measure of another and not finding it lacking. One more thing, she said. When you meet him, don't posture, don't perform. He'll see through it in about 4 seconds, and it'll cost you credibility you'll need later. Kratos stood. He was taller than her, which was not something that happened often with Spartans, and the fact registered in her eyes without changing them. I do not posture, he said. Good. She moved toward the door. Then this might actually go well. The corridor outside smelled differently now. The recycled air carrying something new, a quality of heightened attention, that moved through a military vessel the way weather moved through open country. People were repositioning, conversations were being shortened, with a particular gravity that gathered around someone important was making itself felt through walls and bulkheads in 3 hours of careful institutional distance. The god of war followed a Spartan through a ship full of people fighting for their species' survival and felt something he had not felt since the early days of Midgard. Curiosity, genuine, unguarded curiosity about what came next. He did not examine it too closely, but he did not suppress it either. Section 4. Docking Bay 7 smelled of coolant and hard vacuum, and the particular metallic residue that clung to a ship that had seen recent combat. Scorched polymer, stressed hull plating, the ghost of weapons discharge that no recycled air system ever fully scrubbed clean. The Pillar of Autumn had not come here gently. She bore it in every weld seam and every stress fracture visible along her docking collar. A vessel that had been asked to do too much and had done it anyway out of something that in a ship could only be called stubbornness. Kratos stood at the bay entrance with Linda at his left and 2 additional Spartans flanking him at a distance that was simultaneously respectful and tactically sound. Commander Ewan had positioned herself near the debriefing corridor with 2 ONI analysts in the expression of someone managing the tension between institutional protocol and the recognition that protocol had limited application to present circumstances. Captain Keyes stood at the center of the bay, a lean man in his 50s with silver at his temples and a pipe he was not smoking, holding it instead the way some men held worry stones. Turning it between his fingers with the habitual unconsciousness of a deeply ingrained gesture, the boarding ramp descended. Master Chief Petty Officer John 117 walked down it alone. Kratos had been forming expectations for 3 hours and had deliberately kept them loose. The worst analytical error a warrior could make was to build a picture so complete that reality had no room to deviate from it. But even loose expectations required adjustment. The Spartan who crossed the docking bay floor was not performing anything. He was not projecting authority or managing presence or doing any of the 1,000 small theatrical things that men in positions of significance tended to do when walking into rooms where they were expected. He simply moved with the same fluid mechanical precision as Linda, but denser somehow, more absolute. As if the space around him reorganized itself slightly to accommodate the weight of what he was. He stopped 6 meters away. The visor was gold, a reflective amber that showed Kratos his own face back at him, gray skin and red marking, and eyes that had seen the inside of things most beings in any universe never survived. He wondered briefly what the chief saw looking back. Then he stopped wondering and waited. "Master Chief," Captain Keyes said, "this is Kratos. He arrived on Reach through an anomalous portal event connected to the Forerunner signal we flagged 6 hours before the fall. Our analysis suggests the signal was specifically calibrated to his energy signature." A pause. "He claims to be from another reality." The chief said nothing for a moment. His helmet moved. A slight tilt was the practiced micro-movement of someone reading a situation through a visor that fed him more data than human senses alone could process. Kratos let him read. He had nothing to hide and no interest in the performance of openness. "You killed gods," the chief said finally. His voice was what Kratos had expected from the body. Low even, stripped of decoration. A voice that had learned economy through necessity. "Yes. Which ones? Greek, Norse, others." A pause. "It was not a hobby. It was a consequence of decisions made by others and my own failures to find better paths." Another silence. The chief turned his head fractionally toward Linda. A communication too small for anyone without their shared ears to read, and then back. "You landed on Reach," he said. "Yes, you saw what was left. I walked it for an hour before your soldiers found me. What did you think?" The question was not what Kratos had anticipated. Not what are you capable of, or what do you want, or are you a threat? The questions that every commander in every universe eventually arrived at when confronting an unknown variable. What did you think? The specific query of someone who wanted to know what a fresh set of eyes had seen in a place that everyone who mattered to him had already processed through the filter of grief and responsibility. "I thought it was thorough," Kratos said. Whoever did it was not angry. They were methodical. There is a difference between destruction driven by rage and destruction driven by doctrine. Rage leaves patterns, escalation, focal points, the evidence of feeling. What was done to that world was done without feeling. It was administration. Something shifted behind the gold visor. Minute, controlled, but present. That's accurate, the chief said. Your enemy does not hate you, Kratos continued. That is in some ways more dangerous than hatred. Hatred can be reasoned with, redirected, exhausted. An enemy operating from doctrine, from religious or ideological certainty, does not tire and does not doubt. He met the visor's reflective surface. I have fought gods who believe themselves righteous. The believing does not make them right, but it makes them committed in ways that ordinary self-interest does not sustain. Captain Keyes had stopped turning his pipe. You've fought religious wars before, Keyes said. And I have been the subject of them. A beat of silence that carried more weight than most conversations. The chief stepped forward, not aggressively, simply closing the distance to a range that, in human social physics, read as direct engagement. The space where conversations became real rather than formal. Up close, he was larger than the Bey's perspective had suggested, the Mjolnir armor adding mass to a frame that was already beyond standard human parameters. Kratos did not step back. He never stepped back. But he recognized the gesture for what it was. Not intimidation, but an offering. I am treating you as an equal. Confirm or deny. The Forerunner signal, the chief said. It's not the first anomalous one we've tracked in the last month. There's a pattern emerging, structures activating on worlds we've already lost. Reach was the latest, but there were 3 before it. He paused. They're building towards something. We don't know what. And you believe my arrival is connected? Cortana does. At Keyes' slight nod, a holographic figure shimmered into existence from an emitter on the chief's left pauldron. Small, blue-violet, rendered in light and unmistakably, immediately intelligent. She looked at Kratos with eyes that processed faster than any organic system and with an expression that managed to be simultaneously analytical and unexpectedly delighted. The energy signature from your arrival, Cortana said, matches the resonant frequency of a specific class of Forerunner construct, Keyship Tier, which is roughly equivalent to saying the most significant thing they ever built. The signal on Reach wasn't opening a door randomly, it was tuned. It was looking for something with a specific relationship to what the Forerunners called the mantle, the divine right and responsibility to protect all life. She tilted her head. You carry weapons of divine origin. You've absorbed the power of multiple godlike beings. From a Forerunner sensor array's perspective, you would read as the closest thing to a mantle bearer this universe has seen since the Forerunners themselves. The Bey was very quiet. You are saying, Kratos said slowly, that your ancient builders reached into another reality and pulled me through because I register as something they recognized. I'm saying their automated systems did. The Forerunners themselves are gone, mostly. What's left is infrastructure running on protocols set down 100,000 years ago. I'm still trying to fulfill directives its creators never came back to cancel. Cortana's expression shifted, still analytical, but with something running beneath it that Kratos had learned through long and painful experience to identify as the particular concern of an intelligence that had seen further down a road than it wanted to. The problem is that if their systems flagged you as a mantle bearer, something else will have received the same notification. The Covenant, Linda said from his left. Their prophets monitor every Forerunner signal, every activation. They've built their entire religious framework around the Forerunner legacy. Cortana looked directly at Kratos. They now know that something divine just arrived in this system. And their theology has a very specific response protocol for divine artifacts that appear outside Covenant control. Captain Keyes finally put the pipe in his pocket. How long, he asked. Based on signal propagation and their nearest fleet position? Cortana paused. 18 hours, maybe less. The chief turned to Kratos. The gold visor reflected nothing and communicated everything. They'll come for you, he said. In force. They'll call it a holy retrieval. Kratos looked at the AI, the captain, the Spartans, and the ship around him built by people fighting a war they were slowly losing against an enemy that did not hate them, only believed with total administrative certainty that they needed to stop existing. "Let them come," he said. It was not bravado. It was the simple arithmetic of a god of war who had spent a lifetime learning the difference between fights that could be avoided and fights that were already decided. This one had been decided the moment he hit the glass of reach. The Covenant fleet arrived in 16 hours, not 18, 16, which meant either Cortana's signal propagation estimate had been slightly optimistic, or the prophets had already had ships moving toward the Forerunner signal before Kratos arrived, had been tracking it, waiting for it to activate, prepared to respond the moment it did. The latter possibility was more concerning and more likely, and the expression on Cortana's holographic face when the long-range sensors flagged the slipspace ruptures made clear she had arrived at the same conclusion approximately 4 seconds before she said it aloud. To 3 Covenant cruisers, 1 carrier, 12 smaller escort vessels of varying class, their energy signatures the familiar purple-blue of plasma-based propulsion that the UNSC had learned to read the way sailors learned to read storm clouds. Not as curiosity, but as survival data. They dropped out of slipspace in a dispersal pattern that was tactically sophisticated, surrounding the UNSC cruiser and the docked Pillar of Autumn at distances that eliminated clean escape vectors without closing to immediate engagement range. A statement of intent delivered in the language of fleet positioning. "We are not here to fight you, we are here to take what you have. Whether those are the same thing depends entirely on you." Captain Keyes had them at battle stations in 4 minutes. It took 6 for the Covenant to open a hailing frequency, which told Kratos something about their communication protocols. They moved to positions of strength before they spoke, which was sensible, and they did speak rather than simply firing, which suggested that whatever they wanted from the situation, they wanted it intact. The holographic display that materialized above the bridge's central console showed a Covenant prophet, one of the species he had been briefed on during the 3 hours of waiting, thin-bodied and ancient-looking, elevated on a hovering throne chair with the specific posture of something that had not stood on its own power in decades and considered this an elevation rather than a limitation. Its robes were deep violet, embroidered with geometric patterns that Cortana had identified in his briefing as Forerunner script, co-opted and recontextualized into religious iconography. The prophet's eyes found Kratos immediately, through a holographic relay across thousands of kilometers of vacuum with a fleet of warships at its command. And it looked straight at him, past Keyes and Cortana and the assembled bridge crew, with the specific attention of something that had been told to look for exactly this and was now confirming its intelligence. "The Holy One," the prophet said. Its voice carried the layered resonance of translation software working in real time, the original language bleeding through underneath like a second melody. "The bearer of the ancient flame, foretold in the 3rd scroll of designated waiting. One shall come bearing the fire of dead gods, called by the sacred rings, marked by the mantle's light." It paused. Its eyes had not moved from Kratos. "You will be received in honor. Your weapons will be enshrined. Your power will be studied and preserved in the name of the great journey." Keyes kept his voice level with the practiced ease of a captain who had learned that tone was strategy. "This is UNSC space. You are addressing... We are not addressing the humans," the prophet said without heat, without cruelty, with the absolute dismissiveness of someone speaking past furniture. "We are addressing the Holy One. The humans are irrelevant to this communication." The bridge was very still. Kratos stepped forward until he was directly in the holographic display's primary pickup range. He looked at the prophet with the expression he had developed over decades of dealing with divine authority. The flat, patient attention of someone who had heard the language of religious certainty before, had been subject to it, had been weaponized by it, and had eventually burned the institution that produced it to the ground. "I am not your Holy One," he said. The prophet's expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, more the recalibration of someone whose script had just received an unexpected deviation. "The ancient signal called to you. You answered. The sacred text..." "I did not answer. I was taken." He kept his voice even. Not aggressive. Not yet. There was information still to gather. and aggression for closed information. Your ancient machines reached into my reality and extracted me without consent. That is not a holy calling. That is a kidnapping. A pause. Behind the prophet's throne, Kratos could see the suggestion of armored figures. Elites, the briefing had called them, the Covenant's warrior caste, large and bipedal, and carrying plasma weapons with the ease of people for whom violence was a first language. The sacred texts do not require consent, the prophet said. They require fulfillment. Every authority I have ever encountered has said something similar, Kratos replied. None of them are still standing. The temperature of the communication shifted. Not anger. The prophet was too practiced for anger, but a recalculation. The eyes moved briefly to the weapons at Kratos' back and hip and returned. You will be brought to high charity, the prophet said. Willingly or otherwise, the distinction matters only to you. The frequency closed. Keys turned from the display with the expression of a man adding a significant new problem to a list that was already unreasonably long. Options, he said, to the bridge at large and to no one in particular. We can't fight that fleet, said the tactical officer, a young lieutenant whose composure was holding through what appeared to be considerable effort. Not with our current complement. The Autumn took damage in the Reach engagement. We're at 60% weapons capability. Shields are... I know our status, Lieutenant. Keyes looked at Master Chief, then at Kratos. The chief spoke first. If they board, they'll tear the ship apart looking for him. Crew casualties would be significant. They will not board, Kratos said. You can't fight a Covenant carrier group, the lieutenant began. I cannot destroy their fleet. I have no interest in destroying their fleet. He turned to Keyes. But they want me intact, and they want me willing. A god dragged in chains to their holy city is a theological problem for them. Their texts apparently describe a willing arrival, a fulfillment of prophecy. If I am taken by force, it invalidates their narrative. He paused. Their scripture is their vulnerability. I have dealt with gods who needed the story of their own divinity to function. Disrupt the story, and you disrupt the power. Cortana materialized on the console beside him, processing rapidly, her surface rendering flickering slightly with the speed of her calculation. He's right. Covenant theological doctrine requires prophetic fulfillment to maintain social cohesion. The prophet's authority depends on the great journey narrative proceeding as written. A forced acquisition of a being their own texts describe as a willing holy arrival would create significant doctrinal problems. She looked up at Kratos. You're suggesting we use their belief system against them. I am suggesting we give them exactly enough of what they want to make them wait, Kratos said, and use the waiting. Keyes studied him for a long moment with the pale, clear eyes of a man who had learned to evaluate unfamiliar solutions quickly or die. What do you need, he asked. Time, and information about these sacred rings your AI mentioned. Cortana's expression shifted. That same quality he had noticed in the docking bay, the too far down the road look, the intelligence that had seen something it wished it hadn't. The Halo Array, she said carefully. 7 rings. Forerunner super weapons capable of eliminating all sentient life in the galaxy. The Covenant calls them the Sacred Rings. They believe activating them will begin the great journey, a transcendence to godhood. She paused. They won't. The rings are a last resort sterilization weapon designed to starve a parasite called the Flood by eliminating its food source. Every thinking being in the galaxy. The bridge absorbed this in silence. They are trying to end all life, Kratos said, because they believe it will make them gods. Essentially, yes. He was quiet for a moment. The weight of a specific, familiar weariness settled across his shoulders. The weariness of someone who had spent a lifetime cleaning up the catastrophic consequences of divine beings who had confused power with wisdom, who had mistaken the capacity for destruction for the right to exercise it. He had been one of them once. Then this is not simply about returning home, he said. No, Cortana said quietly. I don't think it is. Outside, the Covenant fleet held its position, patient, certain, arranged in the geometric precision of absolute religious conviction, waiting for a holy fulfillment that the being at the center of their prophecy had absolutely no intention of providing, at least not in the way they imagined. The plan was not elegant. Elegant plans, in Kratos' experience, were the province of people who had not yet been introduced to the gap between intention and reality. What Keyes and the chief assembled in the Autumn's tactical room over the following 4 hours was something better than elegant. It was functional, built from available materials, designed with enough flexibility to survive first contact with a situation that would inevitably deviate from projections. The broad architecture was Cortana's. The tactical refinements were the chief's. The component that neither of them had planned for, and that Kratos provided without being asked, was the element that made the rest of it work. He would go to the Covenant, not as a prisoner, not as a willing, holy arrival, as something the prophet's script had no category for. A negotiator who was also a weapon, a being of divine origin who understood religious authority from the inside, and knew precisely which load-bearing walls to strike to bring the structure down. "They'll have you surrounded the moment you board," Linda said. She was standing at the tactical display with her helmet under her arm, with the same glass-flat expression she had worn since the docking bay, though Kratos had begun to read the subtle vocabulary of tension underneath it with increasing accuracy. 100 elites minimum on a carrier of that class. Jackals, grunts, probably a zealot honor guard if the prophet considers this retrieval significant enough. "Probably," the chief agreed. He was studying the Covenant carrier's silhouette on the tactical display with the focused attention of someone memorizing a building he intended to burn. Prophet of Regret uses 4 zealots for standard honor functions. This retrieval will rate at least 6. "How many have you killed?" Kratos asked him. A pause. "Zealots?" "In a single engagement." The chief looked at him. 11, in the fall of Reach. But I had Spartans with me in the element of surprise." "I will not have surprise." Kratos studied the carrier schematic Cortana had assembled from UNSC intelligence files. Incomplete, extrapolated, but sufficient for broad architecture. "I will have something more useful, their certainty. They will not expect aggression from the being their texts describe as arriving in willing transcendence. The moment between when they realize the prophecy is not proceeding as written and when they decide how to respond, that is the window." "It'll be a small window," Cortana said from the display panel. "I have worked with smaller." The negotiation with the Covenant fleet took 40 minutes. Kratos handled it himself, standing at the bridge's primary communication array, with Cortana feeding him real-time translation and doctrinal context through an earpiece that the Autumn's medical officer had spent 20 minutes explaining how to insert. The Prophet of Regret, for that was the designation of the specific prophet commanding this retrieval fleet, Cortana had identified him from signal analysis, received his communication with the layered satisfaction of a being whose prophecy was proceeding correctly. Kratos told him he would come aboard. He told him he had questions about the sacred rings that only the hierarchs could answer. He told him, with the careful precision of someone who had spent decades navigating the political architecture of divine courts, that a holy arrival required appropriate preparation. Time to compose himself, to prepare his weapons for the sacred enshrinement the text described. He requested 6 hours. The prophet gave him 4. It was enough. The Covenant shuttle that collected him was crewed by 2 elites and a pilot. Its interior, the deep purple of Covenant aesthetic sensibility, organic curves, bioluminescent lighting, a design philosophy that had decided beauty and function were not competing values. The elites watched him with the focused attention of warriors who had been told this being was holy and simultaneously briefed that holy did not preclude dangerous. Their plasma rifles were holstered. Their hands were close to the holsters. He sat across from them for the duration of the transit and said nothing, which appeared to unsettle them more than aggression would have. The carrier was called Devout Transcendence. He filed the name away without sentiment. He had boarded the ships of gods before, had walked the halls of Olympus itself, had entered the realm of the Norse Aesir as a guest and later as a reckoning. Divine spaces all shared a common design language regardless of the civilization that produced them. The architecture of certainty, built to remind every being who moved through it of the vast differential between themselves and the power that resided at the center. The Covenant had executed this language with considerable skill. The hangar bay where the shuttle docked was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow 40 meters above. its walls lined with the glyphs of Forerunner script repurposed into liturgical decoration. Hundreds of Covenant soldiers lined the bay in formation. Grunts in the back ranks with their methane tanks and wide frightened eyes, jackals along the flanks in their angular armor, and at the front, arranged in the precise geometric formation of an honor guard, 8 elites in the gold armor of zealots, plasma swords deactivated but present at their hips like promises. At the center, elevated on his gravity throne, the prophet of regret waited. He was smaller in person than the holographic relay had suggested, which was always true of authority. The embroidered robes, the ornate throne, the 8 zealots, all of it was the architecture of significance, built around a being that without it would simply be old and fragile and frightened of what it did not control. Kratos walked down the shuttle ramp and into the bay and let them look at him. He had learned something in his years of navigating divine courts, that the willingness to be looked at, fully and without performance, was itself a kind of power. Lesser beings needed to control how they were perceived. He had stopped needing that control somewhere in the process of becoming the thing that killed the things that required control. "Holy One," the prophet said, and the bay's acoustics turned the words into something resonant and large. "The sacred texts have spoken true. You stand before us as foretold." "I stand before you," Kratos said, "because I chose to." Understand the difference. A fractional pause in the prophet's composure. The texts describe, "I have read no texts. I follow no prophecy written by beings I have never met about a destiny I did not choose." He moved forward, not quickly, not aggressively, simply steadily, with the patience of something that had decided on its direction and saw no reason to vary it. The zealots shifted. "I came here because I have questions about the sacred rings, about the signal that brought me to your universe, about what the beings who built both of those things actually intended, not what you have decided they intended." The prophet's eyes had acquired the specific quality of an authority encountering a challenge it had not adequately prepared for. "The great journey is a lie." The bay became very quiet, the kind of quiet that only happened in large spaces full of armed beings when something had been said that fundamentally reorganized the room. "The structures your ancient builders left behind are weapons," Kratos continued, his voice carrying through the silence without effort. The voice of a man who had addressed armies and gods, and the empty sky after everything he loved had been taken from him. "Designed to kill everything that thinks in order to destroy a parasite that feeds on thought. There is no transcendence at the end of the path you are following. There is only death, your death alongside every other living thing in this galaxy." The prophet stared at him. "You carry the mantle," he said finally, his voice stripped of its resonant performance and reduced to something smaller and more genuine. "You cannot know." "I carry the power of dead gods," Kratos said. "I know what divine authority looks like when it is genuine and when it is borrowed. Yours is borrowed. The beings you worship did not leave you a path to transcendence. They left you a countdown." One of the zealots drew his plasma sword. The blade ignited, blue-white, crackling with contained energy. The distinctive sound of Covenant plasma technology initializing filling the sudden, charged air of the bay. Kratos looked at it without moving. Then he looked at the zealot holding it with the expression of a man performing a mental calculation he had already completed. "That," he said quietly, "would be a mistake." The zealot looked at the prophet. The prophet looked at Kratos. And in the space of that exchange glance, authority checking with authority, neither certain, both recalculating, Kratos reached back and took hold of the blades of chaos. The chains sang against his armor as they uncoiled. The blades ignited with their own fire, not Covenant plasma, not Forerunner technology, but the deep arterial flame of Olympian divine power, the fire of a forged god's hatred given permanent physical expression, burning in colors that had no classification in Covenant liturgy or UNSC science. 8 zealots saw it. 8 zealots made the same decision simultaneously, because they were very well trained, and training was what filled the space where doubt had been removed. Every plasma sword in the bay ignited at once, and Kratos, who had stood in the throne room of Zeus and the Hall of Odin, and every divine court that had ever made the error of believing he could be contained by the architecture of their certainty, smiled for the first time since he had landed on the glass of Reach. "Good," he said. The first zealot died before his plasma sword completed its arc. The blade of chaos took him across the chest in a motion that was less strike than redirection. Kratos stepping inside the swing's geometry, the chain wrapping the elite's weapon arm, the blade finding the gap between pauldron and torso plate, with the specific efficiency of a weapon that had been educated by 3 decades of combat against beings considerably more durable than anything in this bay. The zealot's armor was impressive. The blades of chaos had killed gods wearing the full panoply of Olympus. The comparison was not favorable to the armor. The second zealot came from the right with the coordinated timing of a unit that had trained together long enough to move as a single organism. Kratos dropped beneath the plasma sword's horizontal sweep. He felt the heat of the blade pass 6 inches above his head, close enough to smell the ionized air it displaced, and drove the Leviathan axe upward in a rising strike that impacted the elite's helmet with enough force to separate it from the neck ring and deposit the zealot against the far wall of the hangar bay at a velocity that left a significant impression in the Covenant hull plating. The zealot was not dead. That had been deliberate. Corpses conveyed one message. Living beings embedded in walls conveyed a more nuanced one. The remaining 6 zealots spread into a semicircle with the practiced discipline of warriors who had reassessed the situation and arrived at a more accurate threat classification. The grunts in the back ranks had retreated into the confused milling pattern of beings whose courage was entirely derived from proximity to larger beings and who were now reconsidering that proximity arrangement. The jackals along the flanks had their energy shields raised, the curved projectors creating a wall of crackling violet light, but none of them were advancing. Everyone in the bay was waiting to see what the prophet would do. The prophet of regret had not moved. His gravity throne held him elevated above the combat at a remove that was simultaneously tactical and theological. The figure of authority observing rather than participating, which was the privilege of authority until it became its vulnerability. His expression had passed through surprise and arrived at something more complex. The specific look of a being whose foundational narrative had just been challenged by evidence it could not immediately refute. "Stop," he said. His zealots stopped, because they were disciplined and because they were uncertain, and because the being across from them had just demonstrated with brisk economy that discipline and uncertainty were not sufficient advantages in the current engagement. Kratos held the blades at his sides, their fire casting moving shadows across the hangar bay's bioluminescent walls. He was breathing evenly, not performing evenness, genuinely even. 6 zealots in a semicircle was not a threat state that required elevated respiration. "Your warriors are skilled," he said to the prophet. "Uwe, the 2 I have not damaged would cause significant difficulty for most opponents." A pause. "I am not most opponents." "You have desecrated a holy vessel," the prophet said, and the layered resonance had returned to his voice. Not genuine authority, Kratos recognized, but the performance of it, the reflexive recourse to tone when content failed. "The texts do not describe." "I know what your texts describe. You told me." Kratos began walking toward the gravity throne, and the 6 standing zealots shifted but did not close. He had established a cost for closing, and they were intelligent enough to require permission before paying it again. A willing arrival, a transcendence, a holy figure who comes in peace to begin the great journey. He stopped 4 meters from the throne. "I told you I was not that. You chose to disbelieve me because your narrative required a different answer. That is the error of every divine court I have ever walked into." The prophet looked down at him from the throne's elevation with eyes that were doing something more interesting than the performance his voice was engaged in. Actually looking, actually calculating the genuine intelligence of a being who had survived long enough in positions of power to know when a situation had moved beyond the script. "You said the rings are weapons," he said, and his voice was quieter now, more real. "You said the journey is a lie. I said the rings will kill everything. That is not interpretation. That is function. The beings who built them left records. Your own acquired texts contain the truth if you read them without the filter of what you wish them to say." He met the prophet's eyes. "I have encountered this before. A pantheon so committed to a version of itself that it could not absorb contradicting evidence. It did not end well for the Pantheon. A long silence. The hangar bay held it collectively, hundreds of beings in suspended attention. If the journey is not transcendence, the prophet said carefully, then what have we? He stopped. The sentence had an ending that he was not prepared to say aloud. In a hangar bay full of his military, on a carrier named for the doctrine he was currently questioning. Kratos understood the position. Well, he had occupied a version of it himself. The moment of recognition that the architecture you had built your existence inside was not what you had been told it was. He had responded to that recognition with rage and destruction. He was not recommending that path. I am not here to destroy your faith, he said. I am here because your ancient builders pulled me through a dimensional rift and deposited me on a dead world. I want to understand why, and I want to return to my son. He paused. These are not the goals of a holy artifact or a prophetic fulfillment. They are the goals of a father who has been separated from his child by forces he did not invite. Something moved in the prophet's face, minute and quickly controlled, but present. The specific resonance that the word son produced in beings old enough to have lost things, which was most beings if they had lived long enough. The signal that called you, the prophet said slowly. There is a key ship in this system. We detected it activating simultaneously with your arrival. A class of vessel we have only ever encountered as ruins. If one is operational. He paused again, working through the implications in real time, and Kratos could see the quality of the intelligence underneath the doctrine. Significant, careful, trapped inside a framework too small for it. It would have the capacity to interface with your point of origin, to reopen what was opened. Where? The fourth planet in this system, a forerunner installation beneath the surface. Our scans have been unable to penetrate it fully, but the signal matches key ship ignition protocols. The prophet looked at him with the expression of someone making a calculation about cost and benefit that was arriving at an uncomfortable answer. We have been unable to access it. Our most sacred technologies are insufficient. The installation responds only to mantle bearer signatures, Cortana's voice said from the earpiece, very quietly. He's telling the truth. I'm reading the same installation signature on long range from the autumn. It lit up the moment you entered the carrier, like it's tracking you. Kratos processed this without changing his expression. The installation on the fourth planet was responding to him. The forerunner systems that had pulled him here were continuing to reach, not just through the portal that had brought him, but through active locator protocols that treated him as a variable they were trying to place correctly. He was not just a visitor who had fallen through a crack. He was a piece being moved on a board whose full dimensions he had not yet seen. You cannot access it, he said to the prophet. No. I can. Yes. The prophet's eyes held the complicated light of a being revising a worldview in real time. Which is why the signal called you, not for the journey, not for enshrinement. A pause in something that might have been the ghost of a genuine theological crisis crossed his ancient features. For a function, the forerunners needed something done, Kratos said, something requiring a specific kind of power. And they built a failsafe into their own infrastructure to call for it if the conditions were met. What conditions? The prophet asked. From the earpiece, Cortana's voice carried the careful flatness of someone delivering information they wish they did not have. The flood. The forerunner records we've recovered reference a specific failsafe protocol. If the parasite ever achieved sufficient spread to threaten galactic extinction again, and if the array's firing solution became untenable, there was a secondary option. A pause. Something that could fight the flood without firing the rings. A mantle bearer with combat-tier divine power could theoretically interface with the key ship's weapon systems and target the flood specifically. Not all life, just the parasite. The hangar bay was very quiet. You are saying, Kratos said, that the beings who built the rings also built a weapon that could make the rings unnecessary. I'm saying they built a failsafe for their failsafe, Cortana said, and it requires someone like you to operate it. Kratos looked at the blades of chaos, the fire still burning, casting its red-gold light across alien architecture and alien faces all processing the same sudden, violent restructuring of their understanding of what the situation was. He had come here to find the way home. He had found instead the reason he had been brought. The two facts sat side by side in his mind with the specific, uncomfortable weight of things that were not incompatible, but were not the same. A door that led home on the other side of a task he had not agreed to and could not in the part of himself that Atreus had slowly, painfully reconstructed. A pretend he did not care about. A galaxy full of living things. A parasite that consumed them. A weapon that could stop it. And a god of war who had been brought here, specifically because something 100,000 years dead had needed hands capable of holding it. He extinguished the blades. He looked at the prophet of regret with the expression of a man who had made a decision he did not entirely like and intended to honor it anyway. "Take me to your hierarchs," he said, "not as a holy artifact, as an ally. There is a difference. You will learn to observe it." He paused. "And you will release the UNSC vessels. They are under my protection." The prophet looked at him for a long moment. The gravity throne hummed in the silence of a hangar bay full of beings recalibrating everything they thought they knew. "Either the text," the prophet said slowly, "may require reinterpretation." "They require it urgently," Kratos agreed. "Begin immediately." High Charity was the size of a small moon. Kratos had seen divine architecture before, Olympus rising from the clouds of Greece, its marble towers catching light in ways that mortal hands could not have engineered without divine assistance. The whole structure a physical argument for the supremacy of the beings who inhabited it. He had seen Asgard, the golden city of the Norse, its bridges and towers built from the accumulated certainty of a pantheon that had decided permanence was a form of power. He understood the language of spaces built to make their inhabitants feel infinite and their visitors feel small. High Charity spoke that language with an ambition that dwarfed anything he had previously encountered. The Covenant Holy City hung in the darkness of slip-space transit, like a cathedral assembled from a moon's worth of material and a civilization's worth of longing. Its surface a complex geometry of spires and docking rings and thermal vents. The whole structure centered on a massive dome that Cortana, still feeding information through his earpiece from the autumn running dark 3 hours behind them, identified as the Mausoleum of the Arbiter, the holiest site in Covenant religious architecture. The city's bioluminescent lighting pulsed in slow rhythms that were either aesthetic or functional, or most likely both. Covenant design philosophy having long since stopped distinguishing between beauty and purpose. 2 million Covenant citizens lived inside it. Military personnel, clergy, administrators, the full social architecture of a civilization organized entirely around a theological framework that was, Kratos now knew with certainty, built on a catastrophic misreading of its own foundational texts. He looked at it through the carrier's observation deck and felt the particular weight of scale. Not awe, which required a degree of innocence he had expended long ago, but the sober recognition of consequence. Whatever happened here would happen inside a space containing 2 million lives organized around a belief system he was about to tell them was wrong. He had destroyed pantheons before. He had not previously considered the civilian population of those pantheons with any particular care, which was among the many things he was no longer willing to replicate. The prophet of regret had been quieter since the hangar bay. Not broken, he was too old and too practiced for a single confrontation to break him, but operating with the careful, deliberate quality of a mind rebuilding its models in real time. He had honored the agreement about the UNSC vessels, which told Kratos something important, that the agreement had cost him something politically, and he had paid it anyway. A being willing to pay political costs for a decision it had arrived at through logic rather than doctrine was a more useful ally than one operating on unexamined faith. They had spent the slip-space transit in conversation. Not comfortable conversation. Kratos did not do comfortable conversation, and the prophet had spent too many decades in the architecture of unquestioned authority to find genuine dialogue easy. But productive conversation, the kind where both parties arrive somewhere neither had started. What Kratos had learned, the Covenant hierarchs, the 3 prophets at the top of the religious hierarchy, truth, mercy, and regret, were not monolithic. Regret was the youngest, the most recently elevated, and the most genuinely invested in the theological questions rather than the political ones. Truth was the opposite. Truth had built his authority on the Great Journey narrative so completely that challenging it was not a theological problem for him, but a survival problem. The journey was the mechanism by which he controlled the covenant, and a journey that led to galactic extinction rather than transcendence was a truth whose authority survived approximately as long as the announcement. "He will not receive this well," Regret said, standing at the observation deck beside Kratos, with his gravity throne humming quietly beneath him. The performance had diminished with distance from his military audience. What remained was smaller and more genuine. Truth has built everything on the certainty of the journey. To tell him the rings are weapons, he already knows, Kratos said. Regret looked at him. "I have dealt with divine authority that maintained doctrine it knew to be false because the doctrine served the authority," Kratos said. "The tell is in how they respond to contradiction. Your prophet of truth, from what you have described, does not engage with challenges to the journey. He eliminates the challengers." He paused. "A being genuinely uncertain about its doctrine debates. A being certain its doctrine is wrong and forces." The silence that followed had the quality of a thing clicking into place. "You are saying he has known," Regret said slowly, "and used the journey as a mechanism of control?" "Yes. And he will view my arrival not as a holy fulfillment, but as the most dangerous theological variable he has encountered. A being with divine power and no investment in his narrative, who knows what the rings actually do and is willing to say so." "He will try to have you killed," Regret said, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing weather. "He will try," Kratos agreed. "When I want you to consider what that attempt will tell your military. When the prophet of truth orders the execution of a being his own sacred texts describe as a holy arrival, what conclusion do soldiers draw?" Regret was quiet for a long time. "That the texts are being managed," he said finally, "rather than interpreted." "Yes, High Charity received them with the full ceremonial architecture of a prophetic fulfillment. Processional formations of covenant honor guard, lining the docking approach, the deep resonant tones of ceremonial instruments that Cortana identified as derived from Forerunner acoustic technology. Crowds of Covenant citizens gathered in the observation galleries above the docking bay, with the specific energy of beings witnessing something their entire existence had been organized around expecting. Kratos walked through it without performance, which confused them, which was the point. The Hierarch's chamber was at the city's center, directly beneath the Mausoleum Dome. A space of such architectural ambition that even Kratos paused one moment to absorb it. The ceiling was 300 meters above the floor, its surface a continuous mosaic of Forerunner script that Cortana was translating in fragments through his earpiece. And what she was translating was not liturgy. It was engineering documentation, installation manuals. The Covenant had decorated their holiest space with Forerunner technical specifications and had been reading them as scripture for 10,000 years without realizing the difference. The prophet of truth was already there. He was older than Regret and larger in the way of beings who had occupied positions of supreme authority long enough that authority had become physical. The gravity throne more ornate, the robes more complex, the geometric precision of his positioning in the room calculated to ensure that every sightline from every entrance arrived at him first. His eyes found Kratos immediately and performed the standard assessment, a competent politician cataloging threat variables. And then performed something less standard. They did not show surprise. They showed recognition. Not the recognition of prophecy fulfilled, the recognition of a contingency that had been calculated and prepared for. Beside truth, the prophet of mercy sat in the posture of extreme age, ancient even by Covenant standards. His attention moving between truth and Kratos with the careful attention of a being that had survived many transitions of power by reading the room faster than anyone else in it. "Holy One," Truth said, with the full ceremonial resonance, the performance immaculate. "The sacred texts have spoken. The great journey awaits." "The rings will kill everything," Kratos said. He had decided on the walk from the docking bay that the direct approach was the only one worth taking. Truth already knew. The room needed to hear it from someone Truth could not immediately discredit. Every living thing in this galaxy, that is their function. Your scripture has mistranslated engineering documentation as theology for 10,000 years. The chamber was silent. Truth looked at him for a long moment with eyes that had known this and had organized an interstellar civilization around the knowing's concealment. Then he said quietly to someone Kratos could not see, "Now." The plasma bolt came from the gallery above, a jackal sniper, positioned before their arrival, which confirmed Kratos' analysis of Truth's operational methodology with depressing precision. It was an excellent shot, precisely aimed, full power, the kind of strike that would have ended most threats before they registered the attack. It hit the Leviathan axe, which Kratos had raised to the precise intercept angle 3 seconds before the shot was fired, because he had identified the sniper's position from the gallery's shadow geometry when he walked in and had spent the subsequent conversation calculating firing solutions. And the plasma dissipated across the axe's dwarven runes in a cascade of blue-white energy and frost. The chamber remained silent for a different reason now. "That," Kratos said, lowering the axe, "was the last uncomplicated decision you will make today." He looked at Truth with the expression of a man who had given the god of the sun the same warning once, and then spent 20 years cleaning up the consequences of the warning being ignored. "I will give you one opportunity," he said. Tell them what the rings do. Tell them what the journey is. Not because I am asking, because the alternative to telling them is me telling them, and I am considerably less invested in the survival of your authority than you are." Truth stared at him across 30 meters of Forerunner engineering documentation, mistaken for Holy Scripture. Mercy, hidden beside him, made the small sound of a being whose threat assessment had just concluded, and regret, arriving at the chamber entrance behind Kratos, said with the voice of someone who had made a decision he could not unmake and was no longer trying to. "Brother, listen to him." Truth moved faster than a prophet had any right to move. The gravity throne surged forward and sideways simultaneously, not toward Kratos, which would have been suicide, and Truth understood that with the crystalline clarity of a being whose survival instincts had been honed across decades of theological politics, but toward the chamber's rear wall, where a section of Forerunner script mosaic slid aside to reveal an activation panel that had no business existing in a space described as purely ceremonial. Truth's hand found it with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed this exact sequence. The panel responded to his touch with the specific chime of a system recognizing an authorized user. The chamber's lighting shifted from ceremonial gold to a deep operational red. "Containment protocol," Cortana said in his ear, her voice carrying the compressed urgency of rapid analysis. "He's triggering a Forerunner security system. The chamber was built on top of an installation node. He has override codes. If he completes the sequence, he can lock down every Forerunner system in High Charity, including the keyship signal and your connection to the installation on the 4th planet." Kratos was already moving. The distance between them was 30 meters across a chamber floor inlaid with the engineering specifications of galactic extinction. He covered it in 4 seconds, which was not his maximum speed, but was sufficient, the Leviathan axe recalled to his hand mid-stride. The blades of chaos uncoiling at his back because a situation with multiple threat vectors required multiple ready weapons, and he had stopped needing to think about that calculus a long time ago. Truth completed 7 of the required 10 inputs before Kratos arrived. The Gravity Throne's defensive systems activated, a hard light barrier that Forerunner architecture had incorporated into the installation node's protective protocols. Blue, white, and solid, angled to deflect physical impacts. Kratos hit it with the axe and felt the resistance of genuine Forerunner engineering pushing back against Dwarven metallurgy in Norse divine inscription, were 2 civilizations worth of technical mastery and direct physical argument. The Forerunner barrier held for 2 strikes. The 3rd strike introduced the barrier to what happened when you applied sufficient divine force to technology that had been designed to withstand everything except of being operating at the mantle-bearer tier that its own systems had called here. The barrier collapsed. Truth had completed 9 inputs. Kratos took the activation panel off the wall. Not elegantly. There was no elegant way to remove a load-bearing piece of Forerunner infrastructure from a wall it had been integrated with for 100,000 years, but thoroughly. The panel came away in a cascade of sparking connections and severed data conduits, and the chamber's red lighting flickered once and returned to gold. And Cortana said containment sequence aborted in the tone of someone who had been holding their breath. Truth's gravity throne had retreated to the far wall. The prophet himself was composed in the way of someone whose contingency had failed and who was now running the next layer of contingency, which was the expression of a being who always had a next layer. "You cannot stop the journey," he said, and the performance was back, impeccable, certain, the voice of absolute authority so thoroughly practiced it had become indistinguishable from conviction. "The covenant will continue with or without your cooperation. The rings will fire. The great journey will... Enough." The word was not loud. It did not need to be. Why, it carried the specific weight of a being who had listened to divine authority justify itself for 3 decades and had arrived at a permanent terminal patience for the exercise. Kratos turned to face the chamber. The honor guard elites had weapons raised. The ceremonial formation had collapsed into a combat formation with the trained efficiency of soldiers who had been waiting for permission to respond to a situation that had been threatening to become this since the god of war walked through the door. He looked past them, to the galleries above, the Covenant citizens who had gathered to witness a prophetic fulfillment and were instead witnessing something that had no category in their theological framework. He spoke to them rather than to the elites. "The rings will kill you," he said, loudly enough to carry to the galleries. "Enter every one of you, every human, every species in this galaxy. That is what they were built to do. Your hierarchs know this. They have known this. They have led you toward a weapon aimed at your own existence and called it transcendence." The galleries were very still. "You have been lied to," Kratos continued, "not by your faith, by the people managing your faith. There is a difference, and it matters because the faith itself, the reverence for the beings who built these structures, is not wrong. What they built was real. What they intended was the protection of life. The rings are their final option, reserved for a parasite that consumes all thinking beings. Not a door to godhood, an emergency measure against extinction." He paused. "I know the difference between a god who protects and a god who controls. I have killed both kinds. The beings who built these structures were the former. The beings who told you what those structures mean are the latter." The silence in the chamber had a different quality now. Not the silence of suppressed response, but the silence of active processing. The particular quality of a large group of beings simultaneously running the same calculation and arriving at answers that were reorganizing everything. Truth moved. Not toward Kratos. He had abandoned that approach permanently after the barrier. Toward mercy. What passed between them was too quiet to hear across the chamber, but Kratos had spent years reading the body language of divine courts, and he read this one accurately. Truth was asking for something, and mercy, ancient, careful, while still running threat assessments that had kept him alive through more transitions of power than anyone else in this room, was not giving it. Mercy looked at Truth with the expression of a being whose own recalculation had just completed, and said something that made Truth's composure crack for the first time. Then Mercy turned his gravity throne toward Kratos. "The installation," he said, his voice carrying the specific texture of extreme age. Slow, deliberate, each word placed with care. "On the 4th planet, you can reach it. Yes, and it can send you home. That is what I am told. And before it does..." Mercy paused, and the pause had the weight of something being set down after being carried a very long time. "It can interface with the key ship weapon systems, target the flood specifically, without firing the array." "Yes." Another pause. Mercy looked at the chamber's ceiling, at the Forerunner engineering documentation that his civilization had spent 10,000 years reading as the word of gods. "Then go," he said simply, "before Truth finds his next contingency." Truth's voice came from the far wall, stripped now of its performance, reduced to the raw register of a being whose life's architecture was collapsing, and who had decided that if it was collapsing, it would collapse onto everything around it. "The elites will not allow..." "The elites," said a new voice from the chamber entrance, "will stand down." The Arbiter walked in. Kratos had not met him. He had been briefed. A disgraced commander, stripped of rank, given the Arbiter's mantle as a death sentence dressed as honor, Wayne sent on suicidal missions in the name of a faith he was beginning to doubt. The armor was different from the Zealots. Darker, more austere, the ceremonial markings of a being the Covenant had decided was expendable. The face beneath the helmet, visible through the raised visor, carried the specific quality of someone who had been lied to in a way that had cost people he cared about their lives, and who had recently confirmed the lie, and who had not yet decided what to do with the confirmation, but had decided to start by walking into the room where it mattered. Behind him, 12 elites in standard combat armor, not zealots, soldiers who had served with him, who had followed him into the suicidal missions, who were here because he was here, rather than because protocol required it. "I received Cortana's transmission," the Arbiter said. And he was looking at Kratos with the direct, unadorned attention of a warrior taking accurate measure. The UNSC broadcast the Forerunner records on a frequency our military communication systems monitor. He paused. It was persuasive. In Kratos' ear. "You're welcome," Cortana said, with a satisfaction that was entirely justified. Truth's next contingency, whatever it had been, did not survive the Arbiter's entry into the room. The political architecture required to execute it, the elite's compliance, the honor guard's loyalty, the military apparatus that Truth's authority ultimately rested on, had just shifted beneath him, and he was old enough and intelligent enough to feel the shift and know what it meant. Kratos crossed the chamber to where Truth had retreated. The prophet watched him come with eyes that had finally completely abandoned performance and showed only the thing underneath. Not conviction, not authority, but the naked calculation of a being that had run out of moves and was assessing the remaining options. "You have two choices," Kratos said quietly, so only Truth could hear. "You tell your Covenant everything, all of it, the rings, the journey, the records you have suppressed. You do it publicly, completely, and without reservation. And then you spend whatever time remains to you doing what Forerunner doctrine actually required, protecting life rather than ending it." He paused. "Or," Truth said. Kratos looked at him with the expression of a man who had once stood in this exact relational geometry with the god of the sun and had learned at enormous cost. That mercy was not weakness, but that mercy without consequence was simply permission. "There is no or," he said. "That is the choice. What you do with it determines everything that follows." Truth looked at him for a long moment across the ruins of 10,000 years of managed doctrine. Then slowly, the gravity throne moved forward, toward the center of the chamber, toward the galleries where his Covenant waited. The fourth planet had no name in any human catalog. The UNSC had assigned it a designation, Epsilon Eridani IV, a notation as functional and as loveless as everything else in a military cartography system designed for navigation rather than meaning. The Covenant called it the Threshold of Beginning, which was the kind of name that revealed exactly how thoroughly a civilization could misread its own evidence. The planet was not a threshold of anything, had never been a threshold of anything, was in fact a cold and largely featureless rock whose sole significance was geological. Beneath its surface, shielded by 300 meters of ferrous stone and a Forerunner containment field that had been running without interruption for 100,000 years, something vast was waiting. The Pelican carrying Kratos, the Chief, Linda, and Cortana's mobile platform, a salvaged piece of UNSC field hardware that she had transferred herself into for the duration, because she had decided she was not missing this. Broke atmosphere in the gray pre-dawn of the planet's rotation cycle. Below them, the surface was unremarkable. Brown-gray stone, equal thin atmosphere, the occasional geometric scar in the landscape where Forerunner construction had broken through to the surface and been worn down to near invisibility by millennia of wind and erosion. Then the installation responded to Kratos' proximity and the scars lit up. Blue-white light climbing from the geometric lines like water-filling channels, moving outward from a central point directly below them in expanding rings that had nothing to do with natural geology and everything to do with the system waking up after an extremely long sleep. The Chief banked the Pelican toward the central point without being asked. Below, a platform had risen from the surface. Forerunner architecture emerging from the stone with the smooth, unhurried certainty of technology that had been waiting for exactly this moment and had never doubted it would arrive. They landed. The walk from the Pelican to the installation entrance took 4 minutes, across a platform of Forerunner alloy that rang softly under their boots with each step. Not an echo exactly, more the sound of something resonating with what was walking on it, reading them, cataloging, deciding. The entrance was a vertical slab of light rather than a physical door, deep blue with currents of gold moving through it in patterns that Cortana said were a welcome sequence, and then corrected herself to say was the Forerunner equivalent of a welcome sequence. The distinction being important because the original had not been designed for beings whose concept of welcome had developed independently of the civilization that built this place. Kratos walked through it first. The interior was vast in the specific way of Forerunner spaces. Not architecturally vast, the ceiling was only 20 meters above them, but vast in the sense of compressed significance. Every surface containing more information per square meter than most civilizations produced in a century. The walls were active, not decorative, not structural, but operational, running processes that Cortana spent the first 30 seconds of their entry trying to catalog and then stopped trying because the scope was beyond her current processing framework, and she had the self-awareness to recognize that. At the center was the interface. On it was not what Kratos had expected, which meant his expectations had been too small. He had anticipated something technological, a console, a platform, a physical mechanism designed for physical interaction. What the Forerunners had built was something more fundamental, a space approximately 4 meters in diameter, where the normal physics of the installation gave way to something else. The air there was different, carrying the specific charge of a place where reality had been deliberately thinned, where the boundary between this universe and whatever lay adjacent to it had been reduced to the minimum necessary thickness for information to pass through. He recognized the quality. It was the same quality the portal on Reach had carried in the final seconds before it collapsed. The key-ship weapons interface is integrated into the same system, Cortana said from the mobile platform, her voice carrying the focused attention of someone processing and reporting simultaneously. They built the return mechanism and the flood targeting system into the same installation because they require the same input. Mantle-tier divine power as an operating key. She paused. You can't use one without the other. The installation won't allow partial activation. If you open the portal home, you also activate the flood targeting system. Explain the targeting system, Kratos said. The key ship overhead, the one that's been running dark since your arrival, carries a weapon that the Forerunners developed as an alternative to the Halo array. Instead of eliminating all life to starve the flood, it targets the flood specifically, a frequency-based disruption weapon tuned to the specific biological signature of flood infection. Every infected cell, every flood form, every spore in the galaxy. She paused. It takes approximately 6 minutes to complete a full galactic sweep once activated. During those 6 minutes, the installation needs a continuous power source at mantle tier to sustain the targeting lock. 6 minutes, the chief said. 6 minutes of continuous divine power output, Cortana confirmed, after which the weapon completes its cycle, the flood is eliminated galaxy-wide, and the portal home opens automatically as the installation powers down. Another pause, and the flatness in her voice carried the specific texture of an intelligence that had found something it wished it hadn't. The power output required will be significant. The installation's own records describe the process as... She stopped. Say it, Kratos said. Consuming, Cortana said quietly. The Forerunner records use the word consuming. They designed this as a sacrifice mechanism. The mantle bearer provides the power. The power is not returned. The installation hummed around them. The chief was looking at him. Linda was looking at him. Cortana's mobile platform was looking at him. None of them said anything, because there was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying with more accuracy than words could manage. Kratos looked at the interface, the thinned place in reality, the door home dressed as a weapon, with a sacrifice mechanism built by beings who had understood that some problems required costs that could not be distributed and had made their infrastructure honest about it. He thought about Atreus, His son somewhere in the Norse realm's aftermath, navigating whatever Ragnarok's resolution had left behind. The boy who had inherited his father's capacity for violence and his mother's capacity for care, and had been slowly, painfully learning to hold both without either consuming the other. The boy who had spent years being told by prophecy what he was, and had decided, with the specific stubbornness of someone who had learned stubbornness from a god of war, to be something else instead. He thought about what Atreus would say if he were here. Not the young Atreus, the one who had needed permission to feel. The one he had become, direct, which certain his mother's wisdom and his father's refusal to accept predetermined outcomes combined into something that was neither of them and entirely itself. You did not come here to die, Father. You came here because something needed doing, and you were the one who could do it. Those are not the same thing. He thought about the Covenant soldiers in high charity, millions of beings who had organized their entire existence around a misread instruction manual and had spent 10,000 years walking toward a weapon pointed at themselves, and who were now, because truth had stood in that chamber and spoken the truth that his name had always been obscuring, beginning the difficult and disorienting work of deciding who they were without the framework that had defined them. He thought about the chief, who had spent his entire life being a weapon in a war he had not chosen, and had somehow, through the specific grace of people who had cared for him in the spaces between battles, remained something more than that. He thought about Faye, about what she would have said in that direct and unhesitating way she had of cutting to the center of things while making it feel like she was simply observing the obvious. You already know what you're going to do. You've known since Cortana finished the sentence. The question is whether you're going to make peace with it or spend the next 3 minutes arguing with yourself about it. The flood, Kratos said, if it is not stopped, it will spread, Cortana said. The Halo Array is the Covenant's current solution. If we stop the Covenant from firing the rings, which we have, at least for now, and the flood achieves sufficient expansion, the array becomes the only remaining option. Every living thing in the galaxy dies on a longer timeline, but with the same outcome. She paused. The weapon in the key ship is the only alternative that preserves life. All of it. And the installation requires a continuous power source for 6 minutes that it will not return. Yes. Kratos was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to the chief. You're Cortana, he said. How long has she been running? The chief was still for a moment. 7 years. She is important to you. It was not a question. The chief answered it anyway, with the economy of someone for whom every word was a commitment. Yes. Good. Kratos looked at Cortana's mobile platform. Then I will tell you something I have learned at considerable cost. Hold on to that. Whatever comes, whatever this war asks of you, whatever it takes, whatever it tries to convince you it requires, hold on to that. He paused. Power without something to protect is just destruction with good aim. I know. I have been that thing. I spent decades being that thing. He looked at Linda. All of you. Remember what you are protecting. Not the Federation, not the species, the specific people, the ones whose names you know. Linda looked at him with those glass-flat eyes that were not, he had learned over the past 16 hours, actually flat at all. You're going in, she said. Yes. The installation says consuming, she said. Not fatal. Consuming is not the same word. He looked at her. Forerunner systems were built with redundancies, she continued, and her voice had the careful precision of someone thinking aloud in real time, building an argument from available materials. The portal opens when the process completes. The portal connects to your point of origin. Your point of origin contains, based on everything you've described, a reality with fundamentally different physical laws, including the divine power structures that this installation is drawing on. She paused. If the consuming process depletes your power here, but your reality replenishes what has been consumed. You are speculating, Kratos said. I speculate for a living, Linda said. It's kept me alive 19 years. Cortana was very quiet for a moment. Then, she's not wrong. The installation's records describe the consuming process in the context of beings native to this universe, whose power source is fixed and non-renewable. You are not native to this universe. Your power derives from a divine framework in your own reality. If the portal opens before the depletion is total, she stopped. Started again. I can't give you a probability. The Forerunner records don't account for the variable you represent. But the logic is sound. Kratos stood at the edge of the interface and considered the specific arithmetic of the situation, a weapon that required him, a cost that might not be what it appeared, a son waiting in a reality on the other side of a door that would open when the work was done. He had spent his entire life being asked to pay costs he had not agreed to for purposes he had not chosen. This time he was choosing. He looked at the chief one final time. If the portal opens, he said, do not follow me through it. What is on the other side is not built for beings from this universe. Understood, the chief said. And the covenant, truth confession, ensure it holds. Ensure regret and the arbiter have what they need to rebuild what truth built on a lie. He paused. A civilization that has only ever known itself through a false story needs help learning who it actually is. That is slow and difficult work, and it will be resisted. Another pause. It is worth doing anyway. The chief said nothing for a moment. Then he extended his hand. Not a Spartan gesture, not a military gesture. The simple human gesture of one person recognizing another across all the categories that separated them. Kratos looked at it. He took it. One firm grip, brief, sufficient. Then he turned to the interface and walked into the thinned place in reality, and the installation recognized him, and the light that rose around him was the blue-white of Forerunner technology, and the red-gold of Olympian fire, and the deep frost blue of a dwarven axe's inscription. All of it combining into something that had no name in any living language because it had never existed before. A god of war from a dead mythology channeling himself through the infrastructure of a dead civilization to protect a galaxy full of living things that would never know his name. 6 minutes. Above the planet, the key ship came to life. Its weapon systems, dormant for 100,000 years, awaiting with the patience of things built by beings who understood that the right moment and the current moment were rarely the same. Reached outward across the galaxy in a sweep of precisely tuned frequency, finding the biological signature of flood infection across every infected world, every infested vessel, every spore drifting in the dark between stars. On the 4th minute, the light inside the installation reached a pitch that made the chief turn away. On the 5th minute, Linda did not turn away. On the 6th minute, the weapon completed its cycle. The portal opened. It was smaller than Kratos had expected. A tear in reality approximately 2 meters tall, ragged at the edges, pulsing with the combined resonance of 2 universes worth of divine framework recognizing each other across the boundary that separated them. Through it, briefly the chief saw something, a landscape of snow and pine, mountains under a gray sky, the specific quality of light that belonged to a world operating under entirely different physical laws. And then Kratos stepped through it. The portal held for 3 seconds after he passed through it, long enough for the installation to complete its shutdown sequence, long enough for Cortana to record the Forerunner data still streaming from the active systems, long enough for the chief to see, through the closing tear in reality, a figure on the other side that was not alone. A younger shape, tall and dark-haired, turning toward the portal's light with an expression that even across the boundary between universes read as unmistakably, completely recognizable. The portal closed. The installation went dark. While the key ship overhead powered down into silence, the chief stood in the dark with Linda and Cortana's mobile platform in a Forerunner installation on a planet with no name. And the silence was the specific silence of something completed. Not empty, but full, the way a room felt after the right words had finally been said in it. "Cortana," he said. "Yes, Chief." "Did he make it?" A pause. The kind that meant she had already run the calculation and was deciding whether to frame the answer in probability or certainty. "The portal completed a full transit cycle before closing," she said. "The installation recorded successful delivery." Another pause. "I'm going to say yes." The chief looked at the place where the portal had been. In the silence of a completed thing, on a world that had no name, he allowed himself one moment of something that was not a tactical assessment or a mission parameter, or a survival calculation. Then he picked up his rifle. "Let's go," he said. "The Arbiter will need us." Outside, the key ship hung dark and vast above the planet. Its weapons spent, its purpose fulfilled. The legacy of a dead civilization's final mercy, made briefly, brilliantly operational by a god from another universe who had come here against his will and left it by choice. On Reach's glass surface, if anyone had been there to see it, the forerunner geometric lines that had lit up to receive a fallen god had gone dark. But in the dust of the glass, where Kratos had first set his feet on this universe's ground and crouched to read what it had to tell him, the starburst crack of his landing remained, permanent, specific, the record of a weight that had touched this world and changed it. Not a holy relic, not a prophecy fulfilled, just evidence that something had been here, that it had mattered, that it had chosen to. Word count 1099. The god of war had come to the Halo universe against his will, pulled through the infrastructure of a dead civilization by automated systems running 100,000-year-old protocols, and had left it by choice, which was the only kind of leaving that had ever meant anything to him. Behind him, a galaxy had been pulled back from the edge of two different extinctions, the Flood's consumption and the Covenant's misguided transcendence. The Arbiter and Regret would rebuild something from Truth's confession, slowly, imperfectly, and with all the difficulty that came from dismantling a lie that had served as the load-bearing wall of an entire civilization's identity. The Chief and Cortana would help because that was what they did. Find the work that needed doing and do it without requiring the work to be clean or the outcome to be certain. And somewhere in the Norse realm's aftermath, in the snow and pine of a world still settling into what it had become after Ragnarok, a father had returned to his son. What Atreus said when the portal closed behind Kratos and they stood again in the same reality. That was between them. Some moments belonged only to the people inside them. But the Forerunner installation's final transmission, recorded by Cortana before the systems went dark, contained a single line of ancient text that she translated 3 days later and kept in her personal memory without broadcasting it. It read, "The mantle endures in those who choose it freely." She thought Kratos would have found that acceptable.